Sure.
Okay, lovely. So I'm going to start off and welcome everyone to the Malloy Industries Masterclass on evaluating and developing entrepreneurial leaders, led by Dane Wagner. And I'm going to give a brief introduction about the Malloy Industries Consulting Group. We help growth stage executives build remote consulting teams so they can reclaim their time while scaling their business from 2 million to 22 million. Our clients work with more than 120 vetted and trustworthy fractional executives so they can achieve business objectives, reach investor milestones, and dedicate time to what matters most. I'm also going to drop my email in the chat and our website in case you want to learn more, and an introduction about the Malloy Industries Masterclass series. It leverages our experts' decades of experience to teach you practical skills in free and virtual Zoom workshops every week. And we're so excited for today's masterclass, where you'll get actionable tips on how to define and measure high performance and entrepreneurial leadership. So thank you and welcome, Dane.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, I'm Dane Wagner. I've had quite the experience working in the field of UX research, data analytics, and business consulting. And currently, I work as a product development leader for Blackhawk Behavior Science, where we make assessments for startups and entrepreneurs. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see. Share. I'll share that. And we should be seeing the slides right now. Everybody sees them?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you. So, with all that experience going from working with startups and large companies, I've been noticing something, which is that the resources that we put towards developing our most important assets, our human capital, are kind of null in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. That's to say that we look at these larger companies and we find that they're putting hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, into ensuring that they have the best talent possible, that they're putting in the correct selection processes, and developing the talent that they have in-house already. But what we find as we look at many entrepreneurial teams is that that's kind of lacking, that a lot of those efforts are kind of put on the back burner in favor of some other needs and tasks. The truth is, though, that shouldn't be the case. And when we do see people actually put in the effort to evaluate and develop their leaders, they don't often do it correctly either. So let's go into that. The first thing that I want to address is that the definition of what an entrepreneurial leader is kind of changes depending on who you're talking to, as well as who that leader is that we're referring to. Unlike a lot of other professions, being an entrepreneurial leader actually changes as you go through the life cycle of your company. This means that you'll gain different roles and tasks and necessities that aren't always the same, kind of like other positions you might find, such as a barista or even a biomedical engineer. Their tasks day to day will stay very similar, but an entrepreneurial leader, that varies. Not to mention that the context itself actually matters a lot. For instance, 90% of entrepreneurial leaders are actually part of a team. And this team varies. We see a range from 2 to 6 members usually within these entrepreneurial teams. And that means that you're not alone. It's not just you doing this one series of tasks. It's you working with other entrepreneurial leaders. In addition, the actual area in which you've invested your company matters as well. Currently, over 70% of US entrepreneurs report their companies as tech-based. Now, this might vary as far as what that actually means and what the, validity of claiming you're a text-based company actually is. But it's no doubt important to say that if you're part of that 70 plus percent, your tasks and responsibilities are going to look different than if you're part of that sub 30%. So there's not just one kind of entrepreneur or entrepreneurial leader. And we've had a history of trying to discover what the heck it means to be an entrepreneur. We've had many studies look at trying to compare entrepreneurs to non entrepreneurs, for instance. But the truth is, we come back and say, we don't know. What actually seems to be the case is that it's a unique experience to be an entrepreneurial leader. There's this entrepreneurial context that we have to consider. And in order to discover what that really means, we have to do something called a work analysis. Now, a work analysis is a process designed to identify key tasks and responsibilities of a specific role. It also considers what the attributes of the workers within those roles are, i.e., what their personality and interests are. The goal of this is to figure out what makes a high performer for that job or work group. If we're looking at entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial leaders, it gets a little messy because, again, we're in a dynamic field that changes as time progresses. But, okay, we got to do a work analysis. Before we even start that, though, we need to answer a question that a lot of people think they already know the answer to. And that's, how do we define performance? Most people, if you ask to define performance, they will tell you very simply, oh, it's how much money we're making, or what the churn rate is, or how many customers we're contacting every day. These are what we would call performance metrics. And the truth is, they're not really performance, they're the outcomes of performance. Performance is actually the tasks and behavior that lead to those outcomes. This is important because if you want to make any kind of change in how your leaders are performing, you can't just focus on trying to change the metric. You have to change on what is actually making those metrics become those outcomes. So we can't just look at the performance metrics. We have to dive deeper into the tasks and behaviors that lead to those outcomes. And that's not to say that we ignore the metrics. In fact, they can be very useful. We often start with the metrics. We say, wow, our revenue is dropping lately. Why is that? And with that question, we lead to asking, what are the tasks and behaviors that lead to revenue gain for our leaders? And are they performing those tasks and behaviors effectively? But as I've said before, and I will say again, entrepreneurial leaders are a unique kind of individual. And it varies as time progresses. So how do we know what those tasks and behaviors are? Isn't it kind of impossible to have a list of what those tasks and behaviors are for everybody? It has to change from leader to leader. Thankfully, that's not necessarily the case. Working with Blackhawk, we've actually discovered quite the slew of tasks and behaviors that seem to be common cross entrepreneurial landscapes. And these are just a couple. This is not an exhaustive list, and it seems like it's a lot. And fret not, We're going to have this slide available to you guys later, as well as the recording on the Malloy website. But just to give you guys a little taste of what some of these common tasks and behaviors are, we have acquiring and managing finances, collaborating and coordinating on team tasks, innovating products and services, long-term planning, mobilizing resources, selling products and designs, and strategic visioning. And as you can see, there's a lot of tasks that are grouped into each of these sections. So acquiring and managing finances might have a lot of tasks that fit in there, one of which might just be directing an organization's financial or budget activities to fund operations, maximize investments, or increase efficiency. But there are many that fit in, and your specific task might look different from someone else's. However, we have found that they all do eventually get grouped into these major sections that I have listed here, as well as a couple more that I couldn't quite fit onto one slide. Now, that being said, the important question after we know what to look for are how to look for them, i.e., how do we measure these tasks and behaviors? Do you just go out and get them? Well, there's a couple different ways to do it. There's, of course, direct observation, where you simply look and watch your leaders perform the tasks and behaviors that they perform every day. You can ask them to fill out their own self-report. You can ask customers about how their experiences were and what those leaders did. You can even check the transactional metadata, which is your internal database of how fast things were done, how many times they were done, what the costs and revenue were for each of those actions, etc. But unfortunately, each of these have drawbacks. Some of them are very intrusive, for instance, direct observation, where we find that if you know you're being observed, you're going to change your behavior. Some of them are a bit more time intensive. Some of them cost a lot of money. And some of them are just honestly logistically complicated. But thankfully, there's kind of a solution here that we have. Because even though none of these capture a full set of your behaviors or your leaders' behaviors, there's one method that kind of helps bridge that gap. And that method is known as the 360 feedback method. And it's what we as best practice recommendations would tell you to go seek out. It's 360 feedback because the idea is you get feedback from everybody around you. A single individual would not see the entire scope of one person's behavior because they don't spend 24 hours with them. In addition, the tasks that you perform in front of them are different than the tasks you might perform in front of somebody else. This leads to a sort of discrepancy between what your peers might believe you perform and how your superiors or direct reports might consider you performing, or even your consumers. By performing a 360 feedback, you can combine all of this data, all of this feedback from each of these sources, and find a more holistic and accurate version of what your behavior really looks like. But it's not as simple as just grabbing any old 360 feedback, because there are a lot on the fields, and you go online and you can check and see, and dozens will pop up. But the truth is, they're not all backed by real relevant data or theory. Some of them are by allegory. for instance. And if anybody in the know has ever experienced it, what works for one person doesn't necessarily always work for somebody else. Instead, we want to aggregate the information from hundreds of data points across the way. There's a lot of assessments, and your needs are the most important part. So, you should ask questions such as, what are their normal clients? Or, how did you come up with the items that are on this 360? Even more importantly, you should check what that measurement is actually measuring, i.e., the tasks and behaviors that this 360 feedback is actually covering, against your own tasks and behaviors you've discovered internally. If they don't align, that 360 feedback assessment is probably not for you. We have to consider the fact that a lot of these assessment companies are built with large businesses and companies in mind. That means that the entrepreneurial context is gone from their consideration. And that is a dangerous thing to have when setting up any kind of assessment for entrepreneurial leaders. So, if we find that we have an effective feedback, 360 feedback assessment, how do we go forward and deal with these scores that we see? Most people will have a mix of low and high scores. That's good. That shows you who has strengths, who has weaknesses, and how to build forward. Sometimes you'll find some individuals have good scores across the board, right? You're all scoring high on these areas. That can be a little dangerous because for a lot of entrepreneurial teams, or even teams in general, they will look at this and say, cool, we've passed the assessment, we've succeeded, and move on. But that's not how it should be. In reality, development is still perfectly possible and should be encouraged for high scorers as well as low scorers. This is because as an entrepreneurial leader, as I said before, your tasks and behaviors change and shift as your company grows. What you might be highly effective at one day might not be as important the next day. And so you need to be ready to change and adapt with these tasks and behaviors and these requirements. So just because you're high right now in certain areas doesn't mean that you should stop developing yourself. And good news, regardless of your levels, regardless of the time in your business, we actually have a lot of ways that you can build your skills, that you can build your strengths to succeed in your company. Some of these I'll go through now. So, first, you have to encourage the open discussion of results and reasons behind the scores. This is something that many people know, but don't necessarily practice. So, I'm sure many of us have all read the Five Dysfunctions of a Team, for instance, by Lencioni. And we might preach it to others, but rarely do we see it actually practiced. So, the first step to building trust among your team members is to openly share where you are as far as feedback goes and ask them for information, deeper information about why they think you've scored the way you have, and give that feedback back to them on why you think they've scored the way they have. This is not to be confused with the idea of telling them exactly how you rated them, because number one priority with 360s should be the anonymity factor. You shouldn't be able to chase somebody down and say, "Why did you score me this way?" Instead, we should be in a comfortable area where you can say, "Hey, I've noticed that you score really high here, and some of your actual behaviors don't seem to reflect that. Why is that?" And open up that question. It helps build on where you're actually showing these efforts, as well as the areas in which you can grow. Should practice goal setting. There's a concept called SMART goals. Some of us may have heard of them, some of us may not have. SMART goals stand for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Specific goals tell you exactly what the outcome is you're seeking to achieve. The achievable portion says that it's not impossible to reach that outcome. Relevant stands for the fact that it should actually consist of the purpose that you're trying to move towards. So if your goal is to improve revenue, maybe the goal shouldn't be to eat more carbs on Saturdays, right? That's not a very relevant goal. And lastly, time bound has you set these goals with a specific deadline in mind. So you should be seeking to have these goals achieved by a certain point and be able to measure them accordingly. Now, this is something, again, we preach a lot of, don't see very often. But studies have shown that SMART goals are one of the major factors in improving productivity and performance across the board. If you follow this SMART acronym when building your goals, you can achieve a lot more than otherwise. As an added tip here, you should consider the fact that smaller goals are often more helpful than larger goals. If you're seeking to just improve revenue as a large goal, there's not a lot of specificity in there, but in addition, it doesn't quite give you the exact steps that you need to take to get that goal completed. Versus a smaller goal, such as making more phone calls towards clients, uh, is not just more specific, but it's a specific step that you could take as part of this larger overarching outcome-based goal. And that's where that difference between looking at performance as outcome-based versus behavior-based comes in play. Should seek out should seek out learning opportunities. So this is one of those aspects where you need to understand that feeling uncomfortable is a good thing. So a lot of leaders, they find themselves in a place where they're starting to feel very comfortable and capable at what they're doing. And they find those specific areas where they are very strong and they stick with them. But that can be dangerous because that doesn't prepare you for when inevitably other areas come into play and your skills are not up to snuff, if you will. What this means is that regularly you should be looking for what we call stretch assignments or opportunities to be uncomfortable practicing new skills. You can learn these skills at seminars, um, wonderful master classes like this, or even conventions. There's many numerous areas that you can reach out to seek these skills. Having a mentor that you can rely on and build alongside is a great resource in this case. But we should be seeking to build the skills that we're not adept at all times, because This enables us to be prepared for when they're needed. And lastly, constantly reassessing or realigning and reposing. This means that we need to go back and say, are we still performing well? Just one 360 performance feedback, for instance, assessment is not going to be enough to tell you anything. It's going to tell you how you were performing when you took it that first time, but it's not going to tell you if you've been developing and effectively growing as time moves on. So we need to reassess. We tend to advise that we look at the 3, 6, 12-month process for these kind of things. If you're revisiting how your performance is, there's not really too much, though. So if you want to revisit your performance every week, that's not a bad thing. You might actually gain a lot of helpful insights as far as finding which development process is working the best versus which development processes aren't really working at all. That brings us to realigning. Realigning has to do with the idea that if you're not going in the right direction, you need to prepare, or you need to be prepared to shift over to the right direction. If one of your development activities seem to be more effective than another, maybe let go of one of them and focus on the one that's working better. If none of them seem to be working, you need to go back to the blackboard and figure out what can help. And lastly, reposer, which is a idea of coming back and attacking again. So just because you've reassessed and you've found that nothing's working doesn't mean that you give up. Or if you find everything's working, doesn't mean you just stop. You need to come back and attack again. You need to move forward and keep pushing this idea of development because you need to be prepared for when all of these cases will evolve and grow with you. As an entrepreneurial leader, that is always the case. You are always growing, evolving, and shifting. We've actually come a little bit early today, and that is all of the actionable tips that I want to share with you guys today. So I would like to open up some time for questions because we need to understand that this isn't it. This isn't everything. There's numerous other strategies and methods that you can use. And what I've shared with you today is only some of the methods and only some of that information because not one size fits all. Everybody's different and everybody's entrepreneurial journey is going to be slightly off from another person's. And this is why I cannot stress enough that it's less about what works for somebody else and more about what works for the aggregate. Look at that data, look at that science that has combined everybody's mass experiences and find how you fit within that. Thank you. So, do we have any questions? I see, Chloe, you have a hand
Oh,
wave.
it was clapping.
Oh, excellent.
Dane, thank you so much for the presentation. I loved it. I'm curious, could you tell us a little bit more about Blackhawk Behavioral Science and the different services you guys offer?
Yeah, I certainly can. So, when it comes to Blackhawk, we actually provide assessments for startups and entrepreneurs that are just in all areas of their progress. So, from the very beginning to where you feel like you've actually come to flourish, uh, we help provide assessments that are built to help your human capital succeed because human capital is one of the most important resources that you have. We offer personality assessments, performance assessments, much like what we just spoke about today, 360 performance assessments, that are focused with the idea of the entrepreneurial context in mind. That means that we're not giving you a cookie cutter box of what we can just throw at any old company. We're giving you assessments that are made with you specifically in mind to help you succeed, backed by, honestly, decades of experience and thousands of research articles as well as case studies. We have a blog that goes into more depth. You can check that out. It's called From IO to IPO. It's hosted on Medium. And you can also just check out our website at blackhawk.io, where we offer very same information as well as our actual links to products and pricing and such.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dane. I'll give
Thank
it
you.
a few moments if anyone has any questions.
Zen, I see you have a hand raised.
Yes, I'm currently in the restaurant, so excuse me for the background. But I'm currently working in the assessment center at FIU as well. I'm working in the institutional effectiveness, and what you have touched upon about the assessment cycle, I was really just had this point that I really want to share, and that's that
Sure.
that sort of like just wanted to understand more and also like contribute, because you're saying that the last steps of the tips was to reassess and also to continuously improve, right? Well,
Yes.
I wasn't getting the word, but but it was a pretty good point, a pretty good point that that also brought up in our institution in the FIU community, where our office's work is also about assessment, where we're constantly trying to make plans and make outcomes attainments for different programs and different departments, and also different small department and institutes within the large institute. So
Right.
I wanted just to share that one of the key points is to really to make attainable and a really relevant outcome and make it very specific, and then change whenever we're trying to assess it and trying to attain a bigger outcome. We have to constantly reassess if our outcome is setting up correctly, and also
Right.
To make adjustments whenever it comes, just like the points that you're sharing. And I wanted to just do you see the points that I'm going at? It's just
Yeah. I really appreciate you echoing some of this information and validating the fact that it's sort of a combination of those SMART goals and readdressing the effectiveness of your decisions for the interventions
right.
and finding what actually worked and what didn't, and specifically focusing on what didn't work and what did work.
Right, and it's a process, and it's it's not a one time. It's not a one-time action, and it has to be a constantly improving action. It's a series of improving, I guess, plans and also actions in order to make this assessment work. So
Precisely. Growth and learning and development is a constant cycle where we have to revisit what we've done in the past and reapply what we've learned from that experience to the present and keep pushing it forward. So that's an excellent point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Does anybody else have comments and or questions to share before we give you guys some of your day back today? All right.
If not, I'd like to thank you again, and we can wrap the masterclass up, but it was very informative. and we'll send a follow-up email with a recording. And if anyone wants to reach out to Dane, we'll also provide your information to everyone. So thank you for coming, and
Yes.
thank you for hosting this.
Thank you.
Okay,
And thank
great.
you all for joining us today.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.